what I found with some of these like really flat, monotonous 100 milers is that does wear on you. So you have to be so good at not just years, sometimes decade plus of like really kind of learning to stay excited or finding ways to stay excited as you were originally to be able to really go to that last bit you have on race day and get that result you're looking for.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Uphill Athlete podcast. My name is Alyssa Clark, and I will be your host today. I am very excited to bring on a legend of the ultra running sport. He has been running ultras since 2010. He is a podcast host, a coach, I think a name just synonymous with our community and with the sport. So, Zach Bitter, thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alyssa. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, well, first off, I didn't even say what you've done in the sport from a spot because you are, I mean, such a legend in just what you've given to the community from, I think, an education, from just um, all of the pieces. But you are currently the 100-mile American record holder with a time of 11 hours, 19 minutes, and 13 seconds. I have to say the time because it's absolutely insane. The current 12-hour American record holder with just shy of 105 miles. You've been a four-time national champion, won the San Diego 100, Javelina 100, Ice Age 50 miler, and also used to be the world record holder for the 100-mile treadmill effort, which is insane to me. Love to get into that more as someone who spent a lot of time on treadmills too. But yeah, Zach, what led you into this kind of crazy world of ultra running? Because you started in 2010, which is on somewhat of the early side of the sport, but what got you here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think of my like evolution through running as being maybe a little bit more gradual than what you would expect from someone who's made a profession out of it. Whereas like, I ran in high school and college, but I was never putting up times in some of the more Olympic distance stuff to ever really think that there was a path forward there. So I sort of learned to run for the sake of running, where it was like, is this a hobby that I'm willing to invest a couple hours a day in on a regular basis while I'm still working and chasing my career at the time was teaching. And the answer then was yes. I was curious, interested, motivated to do those days where you wake up at 4:30 in the morning, run a couple hours, then go into work, and then maybe train again after or something like that. Um, and that sort of led me to just exploring like what it was about running that I really enjoyed. And when I started just going through like the Rolodex of different kind of workouts and the styles and structures of them and maybe where their inputs are, when it came to like, well, which ones do you actually really look forward to, where you're just like you see that schedule and you're like, that I can't wait to do that one. Is usually the long run. So that probably like made me a little bit more like susceptible to finding the ultra world. And through kind of some of the stuff we were chatting about before the podcast in terms of the storytelling aspect of the sport, you see some of these stories and you kind of get excited like, oh, I wonder what that would be like. So I was actually just looking for a race to do one summer, and I found this 50 miler in Wisconsin where I was living at the time. And it's like, well, maybe I'll just try that and see what happens. And my thought process there, I think it was like 24 at the time, 23 or 24. And I was just like looking at it like, okay, well, I'll do this just to see what it's like. And then I probably won't run another one until I'm in my 30s, is my mindset. Because like at that time, it was like, ultra running is kind of what you do maybe after you've sort of exhausted your potential in some of the shorter distance stuff. And I did it, really, really fell in love with that experience to the degree where that same race the following year I did it. And then I was sort of no looking back. I was like, okay, I'm going to do ultra running now going forward. That's going to be the main focus. If I jump into things that are like shorter than that, it'll be for like training purposes versus I'm going to spend half a year peaking for this marathon or something like that. And that opened my eyes to the world of ultra running, but I was still like super ignorant to it. Like I didn't know about anything really other than the trail side for the most part. And as I sort of started doing more races and learning more, I kind of learned about like, okay, well, there's like timed events, there's track ultras, there's mountain ultras, there's all sorts of different stuff. And that sort of led me to where I probably spent most of my time focusing more these runnable 100-mile things and like races like the Desert Solstice Track Invitational. And the funny thing about that is I did Desert Solstice the first time in 2013. and that's where I broke the American record for 100 miles the first time. I didn't even know there was a 12-hour event or a 12-hour world record. So Nick Curry, who was more hands-on with Aravaipa back then, he was out there like RDing that event, and he told me like just before mile 90 about the 12-hour world record. So it was like I learned 90 miles into that race that that was actually another event within the event essentially that I was in. And yeah, you kind of learn with everybody else, I guess, for the most part with that sort of stuff. And that kind of got me hooked on just oh, okay, there's actually like an element here of specificity within, training. Living in Wisconsin, I did a lot more road running and flat stuff than I did mountain running, stuff like that. So being able to do events that maybe cater to my training a little more specifically was kind of eye-catching. And then having a really positive first experience, I think really set me up to be able to tolerate maybe the variance in mentality about being on a 400-meter track for an ultra marathon versus out on the trails and more scenic areas.
Yes, I wanted to, just for our listeners who might not be aware of what Desert Solstice is, it's a, well, I assume there's a number, I mean, known for being 24 hours is kind of the actual event, and then there's kind of records that can be set within it. Is that correct?
Yeah, the way I usually look at it is it's like it's a 24-hour event, but within that, the real framework of Desert Solstice is we want to create an avenue where people can chase records. So whether that's the 24-hour, the 12-hour, 100 miles, 100K, even 50K, and then age group too. So any given year that Solstice ends up having a pretty good field, you're going to see a variety of that where you might see someone chasing the 50 to 55-year-old 100K world best or something like that, or you might see someone trying to hit their the American record in the 24 hour, or what I've done mostly at those events to date would be chasing a fast 100-mile time. And yeah, you can do a lot within it, and it's just set up with that kind of like record chasing mindset in place.
Love it. Yeah, and so this is based on a track. It's a high school track.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, a high school track in Arizona in early December
Yeah.
time
Hmm.
frame, so that it's good temperatures, and there's tent set up so you have aid as much as you want. Don't have to carry anything. So these are set up to run fast, but on the other hand, you are running around a track for that period of time. So I can tell you, I've done, attempted, not even done, one timed loop event. Oh, actually, I was trying to do 100 miles. It was around a 1-ish mile loop, and I was losing my mind and stopped at 50K. I was just looking up the mountains because it's based in California. I was like, I just want to be up there. Mentally, what are some of the elements that you lean on to work on the monotony? And these are great because we have a lot of athletes who are training to climb Everest, Denali, etc. And they live in New York City, they live in Florida, and so they're on a stairmaster or they're running stairs in their stairwell on a treadmill. And I always say that if you can mentally deal with, say, a 4 hour or 5 hour session on a treadmill or running up and down your stairs, you're going to do great. And I feel like some of that translates a bit from what you are able to do on a track or a treadmill. So what are some of the mental pieces that you bring into these events?
Yeah, it's a great question. The way I usually describe this is you gain a huge advantage logistically when you get on a short loop course like this, because, like you said, you don't have to worry about packs. You don't have to worry about is it going to feel weird to carry a bottle because you're getting access to that basically whenever you want it. You don't even have to really worry about mistakes with that either, because like if my crew hands me the wrong thing or forgets to hand me something, I'm there back in less than 2 minutes. So it's so easy to remedy
Good
that
point.
stuff. So you sort of relieve that mental stress of thinking about like, okay, do I have everything in line? What am I forgetting? You can almost like be a little more lazy on that side of things. But you also have to tolerate the reality that once you've been out there for a couple minutes, you've seen the entire course and that's not changing. So how do I kind of manage that world? And the way I've kind of learned to maybe do it is, I got past the sort of like port where you're like kind of ignorance is bliss when you do the first couple, where you just really don't know, like, okay, how bad could this get? And you sort of lean on that a little bit in the early stages to, all right, and now I know what I'm getting into, and I have to learn how to manage these situations better. And some of that just comes down to how do you train the mind while you're training the body. So a characteristic of ultra marathon running that's not unique to the track is you're just not really going to have access to that full time frame that your mind is going to have to be on and focused in training. You're going to be doing it in chunks. So I kind of step back and think, like, well, where do we practice that in real life? And where I kind of found works well for people is most people have a relatively busy life. So you're getting like kind of projects and you're getting like things you have to do that are multi-step. That it's rare that you're just going to be like everything is just kind of like one thing and then another thing and then another thing that gets presented to you one at a time. It's usually like, okay, if I want to get this done, these are all the components that go into it. And once you sort of have that scaffolding in place, then it becomes like, all right, how do I focus my mind where I put the end point in the back of my head so I'm not getting distracted and overwhelmed by it mentally because it's grand, but I'm able to like recognize, okay, I have to do this first before I can even worry about step two, step three, step four. So whether that be like a work project that's going to take you 2 weeks to do that you inevitably scaffold out and kind of have a framework of like the order of what you're going to do things, just connecting that the same way can be really powerful in sort of training your brain to kind of intuitively do that on race day. Because the more I think you can kind of get your mind to just do that naturally versus having to waste a bunch of mental energy like coming up with it while you're out there or finding motivations and things to do while you're out there, the better off you're going to be. And some of it just takes a little bit of experience too, where you sort of recognize spots that kind of stand out where, say like typically I'm not going to probably do much more than like say a 30-mile long run on a track leading into a race like this. So inevitably when I get beyond that point on race day, you're sort of at that spot where it's like, all right, I'm kind of heading into relative unknown territory where my only exposure points to this historically have been other races. And I know that's going to be a challenging spot. So going into it, just like reminding myself, like, this is where my brain is going to start planting those seeds of doubts. And I think knowledge is power with that. If you know that's going to be there, you're less likely to kind of be susceptible to letting your mind get too far ahead of itself and start thinking about, like, how am I ever going to do this for 70 more miles, which is a recipe for disaster. Um, Other things are just like small strategies like I'll go into a race with an idea of what I want, kind of as like, if everything goes great, this is probably what time I'm going to target. And here's the minimal acceptable time here where it's still worth being here and doing this race. And you sort of can build like a split target within that. And I find like once you have that framework, you're sort of working within that kind of like this is as slow as I can go, this is as fast as I should be going. And you want to kind of spot check that to make sure you're landing in there. But you also want to be mindful of not looking at the lap counter every time because there's going to be a level of mental fatigue that comes from just like looking at the lap split every lap. And where I think this really kind of separates itself and makes it a bit of a uniqueness on these type of events is if I see like one lap split fall out like on the slow end, I'm sort of presented with this situation where, well, nothing changed really. Like the course didn't get more difficult. Um, so I must be doing something wrong, or I need to make a change, and pretty immediately too. So I think like the thing you want to really look forward to is your brain is gonna spiral into that negative space very, very quickly, and a matter of a couple laps can kind of hit you the same way as the fatigue that would lead to like a dropout uh, in a little bit of a longer stretch of time out when you're in the trails and you don't have as much data available to you as to or as frequent of data available to you as to whether you're doing good, bad, or otherwise. And I think really learning to kind of recenter with that. So like things that I've used in the past were like, all right, if I hit a spot like a rough patch like that, I need to really, really get good at just zooming in and focusing on like, let's just get two more laps in range and then kind of punt the decision of whether I keep going for whatever target or stay in the race out a little bit and just kind of give myself a few more opportunities because it's just like the trails with this where you're going to hit those low points and it's really about like being patient and waiting for you to come out of that because then you might feel infinitely better all of a sudden and then all of a sudden you're just like cruising and time passes fast and you can kind of get into a bit of a flow. So really just kind of like learning how those present themselves on these more monotonous courses is the big mental piece to the puzzle there. And you got to be comfortable with failure too. Like I've had races in the past where like I dropped out early. And in the moment, I'm like, I'm physically breaking down. It's just not my day to day. I'm going to call it and circle the wagons and try again. And then, like, with further reflection, I realize, oh no, I just failed to kind of like clear that mental hurdle at that time and get to the part where it started feeling good again. And you do enough of them and you kind of get to a point where you sort of know where those typically pop up, how they present themselves, and you just get better at kind of fighting the devil on your shoulder, I guess is the way to put it.
Oh, that was amazing. I especially love the using tasks from your everyday because very similarly to mountaineering sports, etc. I mean, you can't do a 15-hour training day to prepare for your 15-hour summit push. For the most part, I mean, obviously you can do back to backs, etc. But I I don't, well, I mean, this is probably what was playing in my head also when I was doing the loop course is the ease at which you can step away from a track. I mean, if you're out on a trail, it is incredibly sometimes hard to extract yourself or be extracted from an aid station from a very remote area. And also, there, like Western States gets run once a year. It's very hard to get into. You don't have like 5 Western States opportunities per year to do that race. How does that, in some ways, ease of DNFing, which sounds absolutely horrible in many ways, of just like, well, I'm, as you said, I'm having that rough patch. Oh, I just needed to push through it. How do you think that factors into your decision making? Because I mean, these are very hard efforts, and so if you're going after a world record or an American record, you only get so many shots at that. Like, how do you balance that ease of leaving versus, hey, I'm going to stick it out and get through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's worked well for me here is I'll go into a race just taking a really good accounting of like what I did to get there. So like that might be just like kind of reviewing some of the kind of the stuff where it's like when you get presented like with a stretch of training, like maybe closer to the race where you're out on the weekends putting in multiple hours on back-to-back days, it's like that's a sacrifice you're making. You're doing that versus something else. And you start piling those up and you're sort of more you get more and more invested in the race itself then because you start looking at it as less of a okay, um I'm gonna or I'm just sacrificing this one race, and it's more like I'm sacrificing the opportunity that I created for myself with all of those hours that I put into training. So I think the real powerful lever here is minimizing what's in front of you so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Because when you start feeling overwhelmed physically and mentally, that's when you're more ripe to pull the cord and DNF. And I mean, I've had these like even in my best races, like when I ran 11:19 for 100 miles, there was a spot during that race where I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't think I have it today. I don't think the world record is in the cards here. I've already ran 11:40, so is it like, what do I do out here if it's not for chasing that record? And part of me was just I think it was like things lined up well for me that day where it was like that was actually technically supposed to be a training race for a bigger race later that year. So I sort of had some incentive to stay out there as like, okay, well, I could at least get a 12-hour long run in here. So I wasn't gonna maybe pull the cord quite as quickly as if it was like, well, I can turn things around and jump in another race in 6 weeks and try again. So since I sort of had a little bit of that, I caught myself and like look back at that thing I just described where it's like, well, you did a ton of training to get here. And I was actually like, I was in a real unique spot too. It was at the Olympic Training Facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's this 443-meter indoor track where it's totally climate controlled. And at the time, it wasn't a reoccurring event. So I was like, I may never get an environment this pristine where literally everything is controlled, even the weather, even the light. And so I told myself, well, that it seems like a big sacrifice to just call it right now. So I gave myself like a couple miles to kind of get back on track. And then I did. And it was like it started to like really ravel in a positive direction from there. And, so I was like one decision away from either dropping out or potentially just saying, okay, I'm just going to like concede the pace target and probably still run a pretty respectable 100-mile time, but nowhere near what I ended up running. So, yeah, I think it's just like making sure you go into the race with enough like motivation to make like dropping out feel more uncomfortable than the uncomfort you're going to be presented with in any given moment. Um, but, it is an interesting kind of path because, like, those that situation for me all came with, like, experiences and things like that where, I had to learn to kinda look at training as a mental training aspect and actually do the work of, like, accounting for that, so it was easy to think of those things when those negatives crept in versus just not thinking about any of it and then going in and having to do that problem solving during the race itself versus having them kind of readily available to me.
Oh, I think that makes so much sense. And yeah, it's so fascinating to talk to you being in, like we were saying beforehand, that the world of ultra running, it's almost a misnomer to call all of it like the same. I mean, it's running, but it's there's such different challenges to each aspect of it. From trail running to timed events to more road ultras, fodder trail ultras, there's just such a range of it. So it's really fascinating to hear your perspective and just the world that I've dipped my toes less into, but always, I don't know, it's always out there where I'm like, one day I'll try to run a really fast 100. We'll see. But when it comes to your training, what do you focus on? Heart rate, RPE, especially because pace does really matter for your events. Much more, I would say, yes, pace matters in the mountains, but it's like it's so variable. There's a lot of factors that come into it. So how do you play with those pieces during your own training?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question because I love data. So, access to it is just a fun piece to the process for me. But for like practical purposes, it's like, yeah, you need a strategy that is gonna put you in a position to be successful. So I rely real heavily on rate of perceived exertion for the vast majority of my training. Like if I'm gonna do like a short interval session, it's time based and at a specific intensity. So I look at as intensity as fixed, whether I'm like just getting into speed work and maybe a little slower than average, or I'm at the end of speed work and I'm as fit as I've ever been in that side of things. Those workouts are going to feel the same. I might just be quicker at it. So that makes pace a moving target and it makes distance a moving target. Time stays fixed, intensity stays fixed. I deviate from that when it comes to race day specific training. So for like a 100 miler, that's going to be like the long run. I'm going to do that at a prescribed pace for the most part, at least near the end when I'm kind of really dialing in what I want to kind of hit from a pace standpoint during the race itself. Because inevitably I have to be able to produce that pace and tease out whether it's realistic or not. So there's those workouts where I might go out for like a 3 hour long run on a track and say, like, okay, I'm gonna try to average like between 6:30 and 6:45 minute per mile pace. And I'm definitely trying to hit those splits. And then afterwards, I'm sort of reversing that viewpoint of now I'm looking at things like heart rate and intensity and these other factors as like evidence as to whether where I'm at within that pace framework or how aggressive is this, how conservative is this, or where does that fall on the risk factor of whether I apply those paces on race day versus the other way around where if I do say a workout that's based on intensity and time, I might look at that in post workout reflection and check out things like heart rate and see like, okay, is that moving along with pace at this intensity? Um, or with heart rate, I guess it would be more like a little bit more nuance in there where it's like if I start noticing a specific heart rate is if I'm like recovering quicker in between intervals or something like that, that might be a sign like I can tighten the recovery between sessions or between intervals or things like that. Um, but yeah, I think perceived effort is just going to be the more reliable one when you're out there actually executing the workout, especially if you've sort of been in running as long as I have and you've really practiced, kind of learned what it feels like to do a short interval, what it feels like to do a long interval, what it feels like to run kind of what I would call like a base intensity or like the high end of zone two, and these different kind of like training intensity inputs. And then you're sort of relying on your intuition of learning what those feel like over the years to really kind of then produce data that will suggest whether your pace is in a good spot for that given intensity before applying a different training input or something like that.
I'm so glad that you said RPE. Because that's what we no, it's that's what my coach uses. That's what we primarily use at Uphill, because it truly, I mean, I have said this so many times, but what happens if your watch dies, or it gets thrown off a cliff by Sasquatch, or something, along those lines, and you have not learned what those efforts feel like from your own body. Like, I just think it's so important, and I'm so glad that that is backed by someone with your experience. And um yeah, I think RP, it honestly is probably the most challenging in many ways to learn as a newer athlete, but it's so key for understanding how you are approaching your race, approaching training, approaching intervals, because we can get so set on the idea of like, well, 5 months ago I ran this pace, so I should be able to run this pace again. It's like, well, there's so much happened in those 5 months that can determine if that is possible for you right now or not.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, you're spot on with that. It's like RPE, I think, is the best guide, but you do have to learn it. Like, you have to learn what that feels like, and that takes time, and that's gonna take some measurements or some guides for people to do that. So, what I like to do with, like, some of my coaching clients, and then myself at times too, just to kind of, like, get a look in, is I'll do, like, a field test that will be done at a certain intensity, and or it'll just be, like, it'll be a time frame, and then, like, as long as you're able to, like, relatively evenly run it, where you're not, like, getting out so fast where you kind of blow up within the workout, or go out so slow that you're just, like, screaming fast at the end and create, like, an imbalance there, you can sort of pull data for the short term targets too. So sometimes what I'll do is, like, we'll do a field test early on, so we can generate a pace that they're producing at that intensity. And then we might do some workouts based on that pace. That might be like, all right, we're gonna do, like, you're gonna go out to a track and run, repeats at this pace. Or it wouldn't have to be on track. You could do, now that we've got these awesome GPX watches and things like that, we can get that data anywhere. um, and then use that as a way to kind of continue to learn what that feels like, and how it kind of trends over the course of a specific type of workout. And you sort of have a little bit of a window of time where, before we start applying the stressor, we're not going to see adaptations from the physiological level, like, right away. Like, you're not gonna go out and do a short interval session and then automatically, like, all right, the response has happened and now you're automatically faster. It's gonna take a little bit of time. So we can spend, like, say 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 or 6 weeks kind of targeting a pace for something like a short interval session. And as long as the communication is there and we're kind of looking at the data and just saying, okay, well, is the intensity easing off? Is the heart rate data starting to produce lower numbers at these same paces? And then decide, like, okay, is it time to shift that pace down now and kind of recalibrate that? So usually, after, like, one round or a few rounds of speed work, people get pretty intuitive with what it feels like, and then we can kind of start really leaning on that as their primary guide and kind of remove that crutch of things like pace.
I love that. Yeah, I think so much about pace and heart rate. They're wonderful pieces, and I feel like they all support each other. But with newer athletes, I think of heart rate as kind of a training wheel, where it's like, okay, we're going to put some constraints on these RPs, these zones, etc., because you're learning what that means. And then, okay, I'll have them do a workout or two where I'm like, let's not look at our watch. Let's just focus on what RP, and then let's go back and look at that data and be like, oh, wow, that was actually quite a bit higher, quite a bit lower. Like, okay, let's just kind of start learning these calibrations. But I think it's so fun to have, rather than just be really set in there's one way to do this and that's the only way, to have those three in conversation with each other. And I mean, you can add weight in the weight room, etc. Like, it doesn't just have to be pace. There's kind of these
Yeah.
other variables, but I think it's so fun to be able to lean on different aspects depending on what you're trying to produce and
Yeah, no
learn.
doubt. Yeah, it is fun. I think I look at all these things as valuable tools that, when you can combine them all, especially if they are all kind of pointing in the same direction, that's just additional confirmation that you're heading in the right direction. Because with a lot of this, it's like, it's not about absolute precision where, like, oh, if you're 1 second per mile off, then the workout's trash. It's like, there's a range in here that's going to get what we're looking for. and then like learning to kind of operate in that range as best as possible is gonna kind of put us in the right direction and really start to learn some of these things.
If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/let's go, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/let's go. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.
I was lucky enough to be on your podcast a few weeks ago, and I wanted to ask you about this because it really stuck in my head that you mentioned that you did the San Diego 100, which is not the most mountainous 100 miler, but it's punchy, it's climbing. I think depending on, they've changed the course a couple of times, but above I think 15,000 feet of climbing for a 100 miler, so a fair amount more than a track.
Yeah.
And you said that that you used San Diego 100 as kind of one of the pieces that then led you to the 11-hour 100 miler. I'd love to hear about what went into that decision making of doing San Diego 100, how you felt more of that mountainous training translated, and just, yeah, a bit about that journey.
Yeah, I really like that. As for me anyway, like I always think about this through the lens of like just respect for like pro marathon runners because they've sort of like put themselves in a position a lot of times where it's like there's not a lot you can change and the courses are all going to be relatively the same. So you have to be so good at not just years, sometimes decade plus of like really kind of learning to stay excited or finding ways to stay excited as you were originally to be able to really go to that last bit you have on race day and get that result you're looking for. Because what I found with some of these like really flat, monotonous 100 milers is that does wear on you. Where I got to a point where I think it was in 2018, I did Desert Solstice, and I just like I had some issues kind of that were maybe a little bit independent of just like not really wanting to be there as much as I had in the past. But there was definitely on like post reflection a little bit element of that where it's like I just didn't want it as badly as I had in the past at that race. And I think some of that was just kind of the fatigue of like going into multiple training blocks with that exact same focus of okay, I'm going to end up on a 400-meter track and I'm going to see how fast I can run, or I'm going to target this pace, and that kind of wears on you in terms of like an enjoyment factor, a ability to really see progress in training because you sort of whittle down quite a bit how much movement you're going to see in some of these training inputs. So it's a lot of rinse and repeat and then hoping for the best on race day. So I needed a mental break. I needed to just like, all right, I love running still. I love ultra marathon running still. I'm just like not as excited about hopping on a track and running 100 miles right now. And I decided, okay, well, San Diego 100 was in June, and maybe I'll spend the first half of 2019 using that as the primary training target. So that allowed me to kind of switch up the train I was training on. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, so I was just blessed with options where, within an hour drive of Phoenix, you can get on just about anything. And just kind of reset my mind in terms of like what an experience was like going out for a long run on the weekend, where maybe I'm running up Mount Ord instead of around a track at Central High School or something like that. And and then there's also I think the physical side of it too, where if you get into sort of a routine of just running flat all the time, it's very, like, uniform. There's not a lot of variance in there, whereas when you're training for these trail races, you get exposed to so many different angles and so much variety from the terrain too, that I think it just builds probably a healthier physical side of things. So, doing the training for San Diego, like, in the back of my mind, the only kind of, like, concern I had with that decision was it was like, okay, well, is this going to set me back in the sense that I'm going to kind of build myself into a different type of runner and then it's going to take me a lot longer to kind of get back to the flats? So I had to kind of trust that that wasn't going to be the case. And it was actually going to be something that maybe felt like a step back in the short term, but ultimately be a big step forward. And then doing that race, finishing it and having a good experience there. When I recovered from it and then kind of circled back towards, okay, I'm going to target some flat road or track stuff the second half of this year, I felt like totally refreshed mentally, where it was like, okay, I'm really excited now to go and do some real flat, monotonous running. And I noticed pretty quickly there where it's like, okay, my body just feels a little more durable. Like I don't feel like I'm getting as many uh just aches and pains or limiters in terms of imbalances and things like that because I just spent the last half year running on steeper stuff, more technical stuff, varied terrain and things like that. So I probably like back ended some like strength work with some of that stuff with just the running training and things like that. So I sort of like realized after that it was like, all right, there's a physical component here that's probably beneficial, similar to like, when we look at developmental stages of kids, like kids that have long careers or long interest in a specific sport in their adulthood, oftentimes are doing a variety of different sports in their youth. So they're kind of creating this like structure that's just more tolerant, more durable. So in my mind, after that, it was like, okay, there's like this mental relief or this mental change that creates excitement or almost like if I remove it, I'm gonna miss it and then I'm gonna want it versus like feeling like it's always just gonna be there and then lose some of that kind of that glow. And then yeah, the physical side of it too, just kind of creating a different experience for your body to be able to absorb and then kind of clear up maybe some of those things that get neglected when you're just running on flat canal paths and tracks.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, even I think that we talked about this. I by the time I get to fall, I'm like kind of excited to do something flatter because I've spent the summer in the mountains, which I love, but it is really fun to have that different stimulus to work on, oftentimes not weaknesses, but like areas that we don't spend as much time on. So see like, hey, like there's just lower hanging fruit in many ways if you're going after a space that you don't frequent as much. So yeah, I totally agree with that appeal. I can feel my mind at points during the season being like, that sounds really fun. I'd love to
Mhm.
try that out, just to change it up. But I love also the idea that I think mountain running in many ways is hidden strength training.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and not to say that you shouldn't strength train. I'm not saying that, but it really does do a good job of that small muscle um, and ligament strength that I think often gets neglected when we're running kind of one
yeah.
direction all the time.
Yeah, I find like if I'm out on the trails and doing more steep stuff, you're right. I still do strength training, but I could probably be a little bit more kind of cut and dry in the strength department where it's like I go into the strength with the main thing being just like some heavier compound movements versus having all these different kind of accessory movements that I'm likely going to need to include if I'm running on the flats to kind of stave off some of the imbalances that are going to be more or less addressed while just running on that type of terrain.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So speaking honestly kind of along those terms, you've been in the sport since 2010 as we talked about. Did 2010, 2011, 2012 Zach think about what 2025 Zach was doing, and did you plan at all to have longevity in the sport? Was that part of your thought process when you were starting out, or a piece of your training?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I thought about it through the lens of like when I stepped away from teaching, I had signed a 3-year contract with Ultra Footwear at the time, so I sort of had a little bit of time to play with in terms of like, is this a world I can explore and build something within that is sustainable from a career standpoint versus, just a bad life decision in the long term. And I sort of had some abilities where it was like, okay, like my teaching certifications were pretty broad. I was regular ed and special ed certified, so like finding a job teaching wasn't a huge challenge with that with those certifications. So I thought to myself at the time, like, well, if this goes terrible over the 3 years and it just doesn't prove to be something I wanna build a career around, or I just can't cut it, then, it's not gonna be a huge, like, career misstep to go back to teaching and kind of restart that career or things like that. But within that, my thought was like, "Well, what if it is successful? What if I do have a good experience in those 3 years and it does prove to be something I really wanna build a career around? What kind of types of inputs are gonna be meaningful for me outside of, just the training and racing side of stuff?" So, one thing I learned as a teacher was I had summers very available where even when I was teaching full time, I'd have 12 weeks where I could basically train like a professional athlete, where I didn't really have any obligations outside of getting up, training, and then resting, repeating, and doing that if I wanted to. And what I would always learn during those phases of the year was by the end of the summer, when I would get to like week 8, week 9, I started really craving some variety, something else, a different focus, a different challenge to just both kind of like keep my mind occupied. But also I think about this a lot too. It's like how are you training your mind to be able to tolerate a lot when training can't technically produce the level of focus you need for a race that's going to take double digit hours and beyond. And so some of me thought like, okay, I've got these other curiosities, the other interests that I want to explore. How do I balance those with training so that I'm still able to perform, but I'm not feeling like there's like this like weight on my shoulders of this is all I have is these race results. But at the same time, kind of also have something where I'm building some things that are a little more sustainable than me producing a race result. So then, if I did get to a point in my career where it's like, hey, I'm not putting up results that anyone's worth kind of building a brand around or supporting me with, I have the structures in place that make that possible, whether that be coaching or podcasting and things like that. So I don't know that I've ever really taken it more than like a few years at a time and just said, okay, this is still working. Let's keep building. I've always asked myself about like, is this something I'm going to enjoy doing in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And, as the sport's grown and as I've gotten more involved in just the running community as a whole, the health and fitness side of the economy, I guess, it's just been something that's continued to be like motivating and exciting to me. So I've kind of just continued on. So, um, yeah, I'm 39 now, so I could definitely start another career if I wanted to at this point or in the future too. And I haven't ruled out those sort of things. But right now, I think like the stuff that I've been doing since I kind of made that decision have still been really motivating, really exciting, and have presented enough like different things and different challenges to make them something that I really, really have enjoyed.
I love that. Yeah, and I also think, I mean, at the time that you started and I was a little bit after you, as we were discussing before this podcast, professionalization, I mean, that was it was very hard to do. I mean, almost impossible to run and have that be your sole career. So, I think in many ways there was a forcing mechanism that you were always had to think about the future. But I think about that all the time is that if a professional athlete is not considering what they're going to do at the end of their career in the next 3 to 5 years, I think you can be in really big trouble. Um, so I think, I mean, a lot of foresight there. But also, what were you or have you done physically to have longevity in your career, whether in running, cross training, strength training? How has that evolved to keep you performing at the top of the sport?
Yeah, no, it's definitely like a piece of the puzzle. And, there are things where things change, right? So, like, I spent the first 10 years of my ultra running career really not having to think about injuries all that much because I just didn't get them. I mean, I'd have some injuries, but they were never really all that consequential. I'd missed a couple of races in that first 10 years due to an injury I had to manage, but it was never something where it was like, oh, I just didn't have anything available to me this year because I just kept getting hurt. As I've gotten older, I've had more challenges with that, where I've had a variety of different injuries that have been made it more difficult to be consistent and things like that. So, like exploring what are reasonable expectations that I should assume are going to occur as someone gets older and is no longer in that phase of their life where, when you're in your 20s, it's like you can sort of just abuse yourself and then your body responds to it
Yeah.
versus having to be like dialed in on strength work and making sure you're doing all the different things. And it may be not just running or like the way I described is like in my 20s, I liked strength work, so I would do it, but it was a lot less structured, a lot less organized. Where if I felt like, oh man, I feel really good to run again, maybe I'll skip that strength workout and just go for another run. Whereas now it's like, even if I get that sort of thought process, I don't do it. I'm like, well, the strength work is on the calendar and it's there for a reason. I'm gonna go do that, and I'm not gonna like, let my primary joy of running kind of get in the way of having some structures in place that are gonna keep me healthy. Um, right now, I'm exploring just like a different input too, where I'm pretty curious about like the bike input. Or I mean, you could look at it through other angles too. Like I think the sport has done a really good job of showing how this works, where a lot of the mountain runners will maybe spend winter doing a lot more skiing and things like that, and then they kind of come back to the running side of their calendar year with a little bit maybe similar experience that I had when I did San Diego, but just with a total different sport. And I think that sort of stuff really is what probably helps with longevity, being able to get to a point where you're like, okay, maybe when I was younger, I could just rinse and repeat a 150-mile training week for a few weeks leading into a race. Whereas maybe now I need to be a little more mindful about still keeping the key components of that big training volume week in place, but supplementing some of the stuff that's maybe a little less important and removing some of that impact by hopping on the bike instead or something like that. So, yeah, being open to just like the different strategies and what's maybe going to be more beneficial versus less beneficial to kind of help kind of keep things moving in the right direction, and learning to trust your history too, where I think one of the benefits of longer ultras, or ultras in general for the most point, once you probably get away from like the 50K or some of these like things that are just like pretty close to the marathon, is like you have this scenario where the that you're going to lose some speed as you get older, but the degree at which you lose it from a consequence standpoint, that's not going to be outweighed by just decades worth of aerobic development and just knowing how to race a specific distance or duration really well. So you're not going to make a mistake that you have to try to overcome with just brute strength from youth, are things that I think are you just have to start trusting those a little bit more. Where like maybe just due to like the volume of running I've done historically, I don't have to pull that lever quite as hard specifically through running as I did when I was still developing some of those things, and I can afford to train a little bit differently and still make progress.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think just the wisdom that you gain of understanding, hey, okay, this is how I've had this scenario happen in my head, or I've dropped my water bottle, or any of the thousands of things that can go wrong in an ultra. Just being able to rely on that memory bank of problem solving, I think, does make up quite a bit to a certain degree for the speed. I mean, I still think of watching Nikki Spinks, who is an amazing 50 something year old runner out of the UK. I saw her at Tour de Jean, and just her skill at navigating aid stations and climbing, and she came in third that year, I think, at 56 years old. And it's just her wisdom far exceeded any physical differences that she had compared to my 20 something year old self that
Yeah.
just wasn't smart enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's interesting to think about too. And I mean, there's definitely a point at which, I'll get to a spot where it's like I get in a mindset of, okay, I probably just am not going to produce my fastest 100-mile anymore. And do I go for further distance stuff where maybe that's still on the table? Or I guess in my case, since I really haven't done a lot of that, like, anything would technically be a PR. So, but reaching full potential, like where are those lines and those times where maybe you decide, okay, that was something I would have targeted prior, but now I need to move on and adjust and could still be part of the sport and maybe still compete, but in a different distance or duration.
Yeah, so that was kind of the last two pieces I wanted to touch on. Is what are the goals that you have for the future? What are you targeting?
Yeah,
If
so
if you can share.
yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really spoiled with just great examples of like kind of timelines, I guess, where like the we've had world records broken in the 100-mile distance, the 24-hour duration and things like that by individuals in their 40s. So, I see it as like, all right, well, I shouldn't assume that I'm too old to still PR in the 100-mile. So if I'm interested in kind of chasing something like that, then it's probably worth exploring still if I'm excited to it and it's going to be a meaningful build and kind of add value to what I'm trying to do. But also, I'm thinking about like, well, what if that becomes something where I either lose interest in chasing those, from just like, all right, I've done this enough times now where I just don't really want to do this anymore, but I'm still interested in running ultra marathons. Um, these multi-day stuff and these longer races do look really exciting. And there's just so many frameworks to it now with like the last man standing stuff. I've really gotten into kind of the history of the sport too, and been looking into things like the 6-day event and how popular that was at one point. um, over 100 years ago at this point, actually, and watching the sport start to kind of relearn that and get excited about it kind of gets me excited about it too. You see someone like Meg Eckhart go and run 603 miles in 6 days. Um, it's just like, wow, that's really cool, and it feels like such a different experience than going on a track and running relatively fast for 12 hours or less. And part of me is excited about, like, well, I wonder, maybe I'm terrible at that, maybe I'm great at it, that kind of uncertainty of kind of reigniting that same thought process where, when I got into ultra running, I ran up some successful 50 milers, and then it was like, maybe I'm good at 100 miles, maybe I'm not. So you still have that like newness side of things too. So I do think at some point I'll probably want to explore some of that stuff too and just see what it's like, if for nothing else, just to kind of get an idea um, of what that side of the sport actually feels like and experience the difference between, running through multiple nights or trying to figure out when to sleep and when not to sleep and managing all the different characteristics of those type of events too are definitely something that I think I'm going to want to do, which they tend to have a little bit of a longer lifespan, I think, just due to the even more reduction in race day speed needs and things like that.
Yeah, I can tell you the sleep deprivation is not fun. It or at
You've
least
already
I have.
explored that world, yeah.
Yeah, I've yet to find the fun piece about the sleep deprivation. Um, do you look at these explorations as well from kind of your coaching hat perspective as well of like, yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is something where, like, as a coach, there's like, you see a lot of like discussion around this too, where it's like, do you need to be really good at something to be a coach of it? And it's like, no, you don't need to, but we're also in a sport where we're not armed with nearly as much research as what you're going to see for like Olympic distance events or other sports that have just really, really been studied and invested in over the years. So I think there's just still this component of ultra running, especially when you get up to the multi-day stuff, where it if you have an experience, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, I think is
Yeah.
going to give you some tools as a coach that you're just not going to have if you don't actually kind of go through that yourself. You can talk to tons of people, which I've done. You can go out and you can crew and pace and coach at these longer events and things like that, which I've done. But I do think, like, having done, say, something like Cocodona or doing a 6 day event or a last man standing will teach me some things that, I mean, you have to be careful about it too, because like your experience isn't necessarily going to be someone else's experience. So you don't want to like put all the weight in that and just be like, hey, this worked for me, therefore do it because it's going to work for you. But if you have, say, a coaching client that's trying to optimize a multi-day event and they're telling you about an experience, there are going to be some crossovers there that are going to kind of happen to pretty much anyone who does one that are unavoidable that now you have a reference point for. So yeah, I think like, yeah, even if I got to let's say I decided to do some multi-day stuff and find out I'm just terrible at it, but I can still get the experience and not be winning and kind of carry that over to fill some needs within the coaching front and the education side of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't necessarily think you have to be an expert or the best at racing distance to coach it well, but I do think there is so much value in just experiencing. I mean, there is something very bizarre that happens to your brain on night three.
Yeah.
If you have to go and do a third night, it is just a strange experience. And having done it myself and then also now watched people or paced and crewed them, coached, etc., it's helpful just to understand like, yeah, your functioning capacity is very low, and the coming in and out of I'm here, I'm in another world, I don't
Yeah.
even know where I am. Like that's really hard to explain until you've experienced it. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's I totally agree. I do think, and also just the more people, and I'm not saying at all everyone should go out and do multi-day events, etc., but the more people that have knowledge and experience, the more data we're able to bring into the future too. Because I don't even think we've touched what we can actually do in those
Right.
distances. I think we have tremendous strides, but I still think there's a lot of room.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I think, like, Yeah, you look at it through a few different lenses in terms of, like, the doing side of it, and even, like, when you think of, one thing I asked Meg Eckert about when she came on my podcast was, like, you're out there, like, focused on this one goal, sort of like living in an alternate universe, essentially, from what your normal existence would be like for 6 days, and I think the longer you do that, because you get some element of that even in the shorter ultras, but 6 days is a healthy removal from the norm. Like, what is it like to kind of go back into normal life, especially when you have a performance like she did? Is, like, it really hard to kinda re engage with what would be a little bit more typical, and how does that work from, like, the I always think of, like, recovery after race. There's a physical recovery component where you need to let your body recharge from the efforts of the race, as well as the all the rigors that went into the training leading into it. But there's also kind of the mind side, like, how do you kind of get used to being excited again about another task or another goal? And helping someone navigate that with an experience that is specific to it could be very helpful too as a coach, where, the communication piece is a huge valuable part of the coaching experience. So, like, being able to say, like, "Oh, yeah, you know, when I did that too, I struggled to kind of reconnect for a few days, and we just need to be patient here. We don't need to force things right away." And can more or less avoid mistakes as much as kind of have solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, I still Nikki Kimball actually coached me for a bit, and she ran hurt the first year I ran hurt. It was my first 100. And I still remember the advice that she gave me after the race, where she's like, "You might just cry randomly. You're going to have a lot of emotions. You're not going to understand, like, why you feel this way or why there's just water pouring out of your eyes." And I still remember just how helpful it was to be like, "I'm not insane, that
Yeah,
I'm having these these experiences after a race." And yeah, it's I think so relieving when someone says, "You're not crazy. This is
yeah,
just kind of a situation that happens." Or even getting acne, or like, just any number of odd things that happen that maybe aren't the best for us, but at least there's some blueprint of others' experiences.
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think that's powerful.
Absolutely. So, last question, and then we'll wrap. Is this year you stepped away from kind of a more traditional main shoe sponsorship, that I actually didn't realize you've been with Ultra for how many years?
I had been with them for 11 years.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. But what this year led you to decide that you wanted to branch out? You're doing more shoe testing and just giving more shoe reviews and kind of an overall look at that side of the sport. What led to that decision?
Yeah, it's been interesting because I think with sponsorships, there's like a need for them to a degree, right? Where, like, especially if someone is starting the process of trying to build something that's sustainable, where if you want to really be able to, like, step away from other demands that essentially pay the bills and spend time training and racing, having that support to be able to do that is a huge advantage, and at certain points in my career were a necessity to be able to justify it. um I got to a point where, like, between, like, the podcasting and coaching and things like that, I wasn't really, like, financially dependent upon a pro athlete contract to the same degree as I was. So it was like I didn't have to, like, stress about that by saying, like, "Okay, I need to find a shoe sponsor if I wanna continue this journey. I can continue this journey, without that." And then, you start things start adding up too, where, like, the shoe market has this is one of the more interesting evolutions in running throughout my career is, like, when I started running, it was like my mindset was I want to build a training setup where I can put on, like, the lightest, smallest, most responsive pair of shoes as possible, because most ultra runners are probably not going to do that. They're probably going to try to minimize the impact by wearing a heavier, more cushioned shoe on race day, because it is hard. It is a lot of impact. But I thought, like, well, if I can build myself up to be able to tolerate a 4 ounce low profile shoe on race day, more similar to, like, what someone might wear for, like, a 10K or a marathon, then that might be a relative performance advantage. Um, Whereas now the whole world has shifted where essentially we have regulations put on our shoes where you can't stack them up after a certain point because the performance just kind of keeps going as long as this. a relative amount of stability sustained. So like the fastest shoes on the market are now all 40 millimeter max cushion shoes because that foam is so premium where you're going to gain, upwards of maybe 4% efficiency by wearing those versus what would traditionally have been more of a racing flat or marathon type shoe. So what that I think does is it sort of made the shoe world a little bit more like the best way I think I can describe it is like the bike world where if you're doing a specific type of bike race, you're going to get a very specific type of bike, and that might change depending on what event you're doing with it and the different like aspects of that event. And to some degree, you're going to do that with shoes too, but like even before super shoes. But it was a little bit more. I think it was a little bit more expansive, where like more or less I could probably find a shoe that wasn't going to cost me performance with almost any brand. Where so find a brand you really like, one that maybe has more options for you within it, and if you can partner with them, then it's a win-win. Versus now, I think it's like and this is all still evolving, right? Like we just had Puma release a new shoe before the Boston Marathon that the data we have currently shows that it might be more efficient than the most efficient shoe in the market prior to that. Before that, maybe it was Nike, maybe it was Adidas. So we sort of have this like moving target of what shoe is actually going to be the fastest for your shoe for your race now versus in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and things like that. And I mean, if we keep regulations on that, I think that probably eventually normalizes where like pretty much you can pick from multiple brands and really maybe not get that much of a difference. I just don't think that's the case right now. So I wanted some flexibility in actually like not just finding the shoe that is going to produce the best efficiency on average, but find a few shoes that do that and then go in and test and find out which ones are actually going to do that for you. Because there is some variance from one person to the next where someone might find they have a better efficiency gain in like the Zoom X foams versus Puma's Deviate Nitro Elite stuff or any of these other super premium foams they have out there. So I kind of wanted that flexibility to be able to like go into a training block and think, okay, I'm going to actually go into a lab and test a handful of options that feel good on my foot and find which one is actually going to yield the best performance. And that just didn't lend itself to exclusivity. So then it's like, well, how do you kind of navigate that world? And for me, in the short term, I think that's just like going unsponsored for a while so I can kind of explore that world and figure out some of those kind of characteristics that work best for me. And I think there's still options within that world though, too. Like, I think I mean, this is where we were kind of chatting a little bit of this before the podcast too, is like a lot of the influencers, they will do brand partnerships and things like that,
Yeah,
but they're
they're
more
not
like
exclusive though.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're short duration too, where it's like they'll be like they'll say let's say they're doing the Chicago Marathon. Maybe they sign a 4 month partnership with one of the brands is like, okay, I'm gonna use this shoe on at the Chicago Marathon. So all the content I create en route to that is going to be featuring this shoe. Let's see if there's some collaborations here or some support that you can give me here in order to, pick that shoe versus something else. So I think there's options with that too, where like if I decide like, okay, I'm gonna do Desert Solstice or I'm gonna do Tunnel Hill or Javelina or something like that down the road, where when I get to like, okay, which shoe is actually gonna work best for me at this, having connections to all the brands and being able to like pitch like different like content creation ideas and things like that around that, I think that's a path forward. Um, I can understand why an athlete wouldn't want to do that if that's their kind of like their primary focus and they're relying on that because it's stressful to have to like go from like a 1, 2, 3 year structure to okay, now I'm signing these 3 month partnerships and having to do that. So there's definitely pros and cons to either direction. But kind of like I was saying before, I was sort of in a position where I didn't need to rely on exclusivity and the sponsorship that comes along with that. So it kind of allowed me some flexibility to explore the world a little bit more. I'm also really curious about this sort of stuff too. So having that opportunity because like I said, I've been wearing Ultra exclusively for 11 years. So like the running world has evolved and changed and done all sorts of things while I was wearing just Ultra. And I think after 11 years, I kind of got to a point where it was like, all right, I'm curious enough to want to figure this out, want to try some of this different stuff, explore this stuff for a while and see how it goes and just figure out where that leads. And so for now it's about just trying as many options as possible, reviewing shoes and things like that and kind of seeing where it all leads.
Oh, I love that because I mean, it has, as exciting as the sport has become, in the professionalization, etc., the shoe part of it too is just insane of how many different directions it's going. I have kind of a hunch that, I mean, I've had this for a while, that carbon plated trail shoes are actually not the ideal trail. I don't think carbon plates are the way that we should go. I think there's something else. I don't know what it is, but
Mhm.
I think there that something exists. And so, yeah, it's exciting that you're able to explore that a lot more and just
Yeah.
optimize.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've probably over assumed the value of some of the new shoe tech on the trails and what that's gonna do. Um, it gets interesting as you get into the more controlled environments. I think there's a lot more reason to believe you're gonna probably be faster in the premium foams than whatever you would get your hands on, like, pre-2016 and things like that. Which kind of puts me in a bit of more of a unique spot maybe because I'm generally not focusing on the very terrain stuff as, like, a primary race endpoint, but yeah, I mean, I mean, there's still questions I think about what benefits they give you, like, in the long-term duration, because you have this sort of trade-off where you lose some stability to gain performance because there's a weight component and then an energy return component to the super shoe model. So, the best super shoe on the market for you, if it creates enough instability that all of a sudden, like, you're just done at 70 miles, it doesn't matter that you were running way more efficiently for those first 70 miles. You just kind of like painted yourself into a corner that's not going to produce an end result. Um, but yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm also curious too, where I ran my fastest 100 mile in a non super shoe. So, like, part of me thinks, like, okay, well, what if I do receive X% efficiency on that with that exact same performance? How much faster could I be with that sort of with that sort of an input? And I've been fortunate where I know a couple of like kind of the lead researchers on the super shoe world, and one of them, Jeff Burns. I was talking to him, and I was like, if you had to estimate, like, assuming what we know, like, what would you guess would be like the variance between the control shoe and a super shoe for say like a flat 100 miler? And he was like, it's going to be a range and it's going to be dependent from person to person, but with enough people, it's probably going to be between 10 and 30 minutes. So, I mean, that's a huge chunk of time just to
It's
be
huge.
ignoring.
Yeah.
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 So, I mean, I think that I'm curious about that too, where it's like the running world has sort of moved into a spot where it's not a conversation anymore, really, of like, should we allow these or not? I don't think we're not putting that toothpaste back in the tube at this point. So it's about what regulations do we put in place so it doesn't get totally out of hand, but also continue to evolve and develop products that are going to, make the sport exciting and give people options to stuff like that. But I mean, there's all sorts of injury type of scenarios too with products like that. So there's a lot of learning to go into it and self exploration.
Yeah. That's the piece. I mean, yeah, this could be a whole other podcast about
Yeah.
nerding out on shoes, but yeah, just the injury piece, also the form degradation, all of those parts as you're heading into the latter halves of races. Because I mean, they're designed for like marathon and less is always like the hunch that I thought, and then we're kind of like shoving them into the ultra world and seeing if they stick. So yeah, I are you planning a 100-mile effort this year or
Yeah. I actually had a race in June I was going to do. It was actually at the Pettit Center where I ran my fastest time, but I picked up some Achilles issues about a month and a half ago. So I've been doing a lot more biking and a lot less running the last few weeks. So I think I'm going to end up pulling out of that and focusing on doing something a little bit later in the year. But I think I'll do a 100 miler. I'm sort of trying to decide between making like a primary target between like Tunnel Hill or Javelina as kind of two kind of interesting ones that I always enjoy going to either of those events. So I'd really like to kind of explore what I could do in either of those with a good build up from here on.
awesome. Well, I wish you the best of luck, and I'm excited to see how just I mean just literally changing the shoes it will be an exciting component to see, which is wild to say, but it's true. I mean, that will lead to a different outcome of some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
it's a funny world with that sort of thing, and it just adds one more variable to consider, I guess, when we're kinda going through the rigors of training and figuring out what's gonna yield your best result.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Zach, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been so much fun to chat with you. Where can people find you um, online, learn more about you, your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. The best spot to head is just zachbitter.com. That's where I have like the podcast link, coaching stuff link, social media channels and stuff like that. I'm probably most active on Instagram, which is just at zachbitter. Um, yeah, that's the spot.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Zach. And thank you for listening to the Uphill Athlete podcast. If you can rate, review, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, that helps us help more athletes. It's not just one, but a community. We are Uphill Athlete.
One of the most common questions I get is, how should I get started with training? Well, they say the first step is the hardest, so let's make that easy. We are offering free 4-week samples of our most popular training plans for mountaineering, trail running, climbing, and more. Go to uphillathlete.com/let's go to sign up for our newsletter, and you will not only get monthly insights on training for uphill athletes, but you'll also get a sample training plan. It's totally free, so why wait? That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.